I wish. Good evening. I'd like to call the Lowell Public School Committee budget hearing for fiscal year 2024 to order. Please rise and salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Secretary, please take the roll.
Ms. Martin? Here. Ms. Thompson?
Here.
Mayor Chow? Ms. Chun?
Here.
Ms. Del Rossi? Ms. Doherty?
Here.
Ms. DeLay? 4 present, 3 absent.
Thank you. At this time, the special order of business is the public budget hearing, and I would ask Dr. Boyd to kick us off.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. I'm really pleased to present to you the fiscal year 24 Lowell Public Schools budget. I'm providing for you a fully balanced budget that has been submitted in alignment with our strategic plan that the committee approved in the spring of 2020. We're moving through what is a 5-year strategic plan that the committee has wisely updated each year depending on the context of our schools for that fiscal year in question. This particular budget follows 3 themes that we've identified being the needs of our schools in conjunction with our community, which are stability, continuity, and accelerated improvement. Overall, you will find that this budget aligns our finances with our educational plan with every decision that was made. It also includes input from over 400 staff members, community members, and partners, along with our families and our teachers. I'm going to hand the microphone over to Ms. Turner. Ms. Turner is going to walk you through the budget, starting first with an overview, then moving line by line, answering questions from committee members as we go. The cabinet is here to answer any programmatic questions. Ms. Turner will share with you both process as well as accounting. With that, Ms. Turner.
So the slide deck in front of you is going to focus on how we align our finances with our our educational plan. We try to make the strategic plan fiscally equal. I'm going to skip through redundant slides on our core beliefs. The first slide that I want to go over is our general fund forecast. The governor's budget was $586 million more over the prior year. Lowell Public Schools increase was $27.7 million. It went from $200 million to $228 million. Some contributing factors to this increase included an enrollment increase of 220 students. Our per pupil rate increased from $16,000 per student to $17,692 per student. We got additional funding for special ed in-district students, additional funding for special ed out-of-district cost, for ELL students, and for low-income students. This slide in front of you is just a total budget landscape. As requested by one of the school committee members, it is important for us to share with you where the money comes from, not just the line-by-line items. So on this slide, it shows that we have a total budget landscape. $228 million is coming from state aid. $13.2 million is coming from city cash. $5 million comes from our revolving accounts, which are similar to savings accounts. We also get about $48 million in federal, state, and private grants. Of that, $28 million is ESSER, which we're in our last year of that, so we will probably drop back down to approximately $20 million next year of grants. The next slide is just giving you some budget comparisons, how the FY24 budget includes $295 million in total combined revenue, and it goes over all the things I just showed on the the visual slide prior to this. It's showing that we have $28 million in Chapter 70, $16.5 million in non-categorical funding of new funding. It is the final year for ESSER. Again, there's $28.5 million that we expect to spend this year, and we're also expecting to spend $45 million in new money this year. The next slide is just going over our core beliefs, fundamental commitments, goals, and strategy. I'm going to skip over the stuff that's showing how we've gone up in all of the areas like ELL, economically disadvantaged, high needs. Those data slides are there for your information, but I'm going to scroll through. The next slide that I will go over is how we have a multi-tiered support system that we focused on with the funding areas. We want to support students with strategic school-based interventions. We want to meet the non-instructional needs of students, support the homeschool partnership, extend learning time across the district, and support teachers to improve classroom practice. Those multi-tiered support systems help address the 4 strategic priorities, which are to increase access to early learning, increase access for all students to high-performance seats, align secondary programming for all students with post-secondary opportunities, and leverage Lowell's rich diversity through a fundamental commitment to equity. Each of these targeted investments have a slide, and it shows how much we're asking you to invest in that particular investment. Supporting students with strategic school-based interventions, we recommend that we invest additional general fund dollars of $10.7 million, $9.5 million in ESSER investment, which would total a $20 million investment to support students with strategic school-based interventions. Some of the areas that would fall into this area would be a $10.7 million additional investment to fair student funding. Of that $10.7 million, here is a summary of how the schools chose to spend that $10.7 million. They chose to buy an additional academic chair, an additional assistant principal, 4 behavior support specialists, 4 building-based subs, 12 ELL teachers, 1 guidance counselor, 1 instructional specialist, 1 library media specialist, 1 literacy specialist, 2 mental health support staff, 8 math resource teachers, 22 tutors, 22 additional regular ed teachers, 58 paras, 5 parent liaisons, 3 PD coaches, 2 part-time parent liaisons, additional funding to school allocations, which includes contracted services, general supplies, technology. They purchased 2 security guards, 1 SEL teacher, 1 additional social worker, 19 additional SPED teachers, and 1 additional student service specialist. This is just a summary of what the $10 million got us. The other support in students with strategic school-based intervention investment was $8.3 million of supplemental school-based supports. We did this last year. We invested in mental health support, positive behavioral support, classroom coverage, and Renaissance School. So these are the 4 different types of supplements that we added to the school's budgets. The supplement spending did include 4 assistant principals, 22 PBR teachers, 12 building-based subs, 15 paras, 57 tutors, and 32 social workers. That's what the supplements cover. With each investment, you see a spreadsheet at the end. It's just a numeric description of what I'm already telling you, so I won't go over the spreadsheets. It's just showing you the numeric version of what I'm saying on the narratives. The next targeted investment was supporting teachers to improve classroom practice. We recommend a $4.9 million investment into this area. That would include additional recruitment and retention incentives. It would include improving professional learning across the district. It would include additional support through the Office of Equity and Community Empowerment for teachers and support staff to embed culturally and linguistically sustaining practices within the curriculum. Again, here's the spreadsheet showing the numeric version of that. The next targeted investment is extending learning time for students. We recommend an additional investment of $350,000 and then $7.3 million of ESSER investment. That would cover additional learning time of 1.5 school days, the expanded after-school program, the summer program expansion, phase 2 of a universal pre-K initiative that was launched in FY23. A multi-year action plan will be developed to support the implementation of a district-wide K-8 athletic program with this funding. And then it would also cover the Phase 2 of the School Library Revitalization Initiative that we started in FY '23. Again, I'm skipping past the spreadsheet because that's something that you'll see all throughout tonight when you see line by line on the budget. So the next targeted investment is meeting the non-instructional needs of students and school communities. We recommend an investment of general fund dollars of $380,000 and ESSER investment of $11.6 million. This would cover transportation services that were increased across the district for bus passes for the eligible high school students. It would also include services through the Student Resource Center to be expanded so that we can support the recruitment and re-engagements of students who have dropped out of school. It would also cover the full-service community school model, allow us to expand that program to include 2 additional schools in FY '23-24. It would also cover an additional $4 million to be earmarked for investment in prioritized capital improvements.
Excuse me. Would this be an opportunity to ask questions, or do you want to wait till we go line by line?
Whatever you prefer.
So I'm just trying to understand what the Student Resource Center is. Is that something new?
Ms. Desmond?
The Student Resource Center was approved, the positions in the Student Resource Center were approved, I believe, a year ago, or may even be a year and a half ago. And so we do have a person in place, but we don't have the entire Resource Center built out. And what the position focuses on is looking at all of our students that are considered dropouts, and reaching out to them and re-engaging them and providing them a pathway to completing a credential, whether it be a certificate of completion at the high school level or a diploma. And so that work has been ongoing this year.
So how is that different from the Engagement Center? I know we've had that for a while now.
Right, so the Engagement Center is an alternative at the Career Academy. This is a position that actually works with our attendance office, the graduation mentors, the high school guidance department, to actively seek out students that have essentially dropped out or we have not been able to engage in any other way, to try to engage them back into a pathway to completing a credential. So this person might, the director might meet with students and re-engage them and enroll them in the Career Center or the Engagement Center. They might re-enroll them and have them attend Lowell High School and constantly check in with them to see what their progress is towards completion. But this position and this Student Resource Center is really focused on finding students that have dropped out, counseling them, and placing them into a program within our district that will get them to completion. And the Engagement Center is one of those programs that they might be placed in, but they might also go to the Career Academy, they might go to Lowell High. It all depends on the need of the student so that we can really encourage them to stick with it and finish and receive a credential.
So when the slide says, sorry, I have a few questions about the alternative programs. When the slide says will be expanded, how much are we talking about in terms of financial resources to expand it, and what is the program currently? For you, Dr. Boyd, I don't.
So on the next slide, you can see that what we did is when we did our 3-year ESSER plan, we did the Student Resource Center Alternative Ed expansion. We invested for year 3 to have $1.25 million invested in this expansion for year 3, but we knew we could not start it in the previous 2 years, so we set aside $1.2 million for year 3 to actually invest into this program.
So currently, what is the program?
All right, so you have graduation mentors and attendance support, which is additionally staffing the Student Resource Center. So the program is outreach to our students who are disconnected from school, not currently enrolled in any school. Our current alternative programs serve students who are within those alternative programs. The Student Engagement Center, the Re-Engagement Center, is one of those programs. So they serve the students who are enrolled in those programs. This Student Resource Center is about outreach to students who have dropped out of school. Our current attendance office reaches out to students who are absent from school but currently enrolled. At some point, our youngsters are so disengaged from school, continuously disengaged from school, that they are then identified as dropouts. Once they identify as dropouts, prior to this strategy, we had no mechanism within the school district, no strategic mechanism of investment to bring them back to school. So that's the Student Resource Center, which then we are recommending, based on input from staff and the work that Ms. Desmond has done in designing out the Student Resource Center, to further build it out with the graduation mentors and attendance support. In addition, we anticipate that the committee will require additional investment as we bring students back for programming that does not currently exist, that we may re-engage students into programming, and we identify based on their profile of need, we don't have alternative programming that meets their need, or we have a need to expand programming because the initial allocation might be for a limit of students that are currently enrolled, and we may identify significantly more students that require that profile of need, which will require additional teachers and support staff within those programs. So you'll see there the $1.25 million has been planned within year 3 under Ms. Desmond's leadership, year 3 of ESSER. Under year 2 has been the design and build out, and now we're working towards full implementation year 3, which allows for a budgetary allocation. The reason it's in ESSER is because we get allocated on a lagging time frame for student enrollment. So because these students are not currently engaged, they are identified as dropouts, there would need to be startup funds, because next year, once they're enrolled, then they will start to generate their own revenue based on student count in October that allow us to sustain programming. So if you look on this slide here, line 2 and line 3 relate to re-engagement of students who have been disengaged from school. 1, graduation mentors and attendance support. So that works in conjunction and alignment between Ms. Desmond and Mr. Skinner's office, as well as an investment that right now is a line item that would allow you to invest as you identify need going into the next fiscal year.
Thank you, Dr. Boyd. I'm sorry if I seem a little dim. I just want to make sure I understand what you said. So right now, there are no dropout students involved in this program. The $1.25 million is startup funding to get the program rolling. We might need other supports. Is that basically correct?
Yeah, it's not a program. This is a support service that's provided centrally for all students. So the Student Resource Center, one way that you might think about it is the Family Resource Center is not a program. That's an enrollment service that then assigns students out to schools as families come in. The Student Resource Center's outreach to students who are disengaged, high school age students who have dropped out, and then engaging them or connecting them to a program that exists. So the Student Resource Center wouldn't provide the programming, it would connect students back to programming. That could be one of a number of options. It could be back to our comprehensive high school program, if that's the profile of need. It could be to our Career Academy, it could be to the Engagement Center, it could be to our Adult Learning Center, or, which is why you have the placeholder for the adult ed, it could require, because we bring enough students back, expansion of one of those programs or design of new programs. And that's that second placeholder, Madam Chair. So if you're looking at your screen, if your screen looks like mine, you see the second row says alternative ed expansion 1.25. That wouldn't be expansion of the Student Resource Center. That's expansion of programming. If you go down the third line, graduation mentor and attendance support, that's around support within Mr. Skinner's office, who works through chronic truancy, and Ms. Desmond's office that works through dropout re-engagement. Those are not programs. Those are support services of individuals working in outreach to connect kids back to programming. I don't know if am I clarifying it any further for you?
Right. So right now, there's nobody doing it. There's no people involved in it.
Yeah, Ms. Desmond, can you share the current status again, please?
So we have a director in position. The director has been there this year and has made connections with students and has worked to help students find ways to re-engage through various programs that we have. The plan is to expand out the supports. One example is that sometimes students need a different avenue to be able to complete course credits. They might be right near the end, and they might only need a few credits. And so we have something called Apex that we've been using for quite a while. So that might be one avenue through the engagement center that student is then placed there and completes the small amount of credits that they might need to attain that high school diploma. So there's various options for students, and we are engaging in the work right now, but currently we only have the director. So now, as it gets bigger, we're going to have to expand ways in which we support the students, because as Dr. Boyd said, they're not part of our current SIMS data because they've been dropped out. So it's really important to get some students back, but have the seed money to be able to provide the supports they need. And then once they're back, they'll be part of our SIMS data in October.
Thank you. Ms. Martin?
Thank you very much. So basically, the 240 is what is actually running the support program. That's where your salaries are? Okay. And then the 1.225 is in anticipation of expanding programming based on what we see. Okay. That is a little hard to get around. Okay, thank you very much.
Ms. Martin?
Oh, I'm still here, thank you. Could you break out for me the 10 million in facility investments, what we've already committed, and then what is, I know we're seeing 4 additional.
Yeah, so let me take you through just the big that haven't been, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Hall, and he can tell you kind of what's currently within the works. So the 2 big numbers that the committee should be aware of is the one, the STEM expansion that you've been working through, making those dollars haven't been fully expended or anywhere near fully expended. So those dollars are remaining available for the committee as you move through that project, which we anticipate being in the, Dr. Hall, about 5 to 6 million range, am I correct? And then based on how you start to see the build out come through. Then as part of our strategic initiatives for this year, in October, the committee wisely requested that we look for efficiencies within ESSER and reallocate additional dollars towards capital improvements. Those have not been earmarked for any specific project, but the $4 million was identified in the fall as a target for us to increase this investment. We met that target with this budget, so the committee has flexibility with an additional $4 million of investment. One of the requests from the committee was for us to look for additional properties. It was a motion by the committee to explore the possibility of additional properties that may be available to help offset some of the increased need within the district. That's one possibility, but this is flexible, has not been encumbered by the committee. Dr. Hall, if you can take them through the bubblers and other CAULI and other projects that are currently in the work.
It's about I think about a month to 6 weeks ago, the CAULI project conversion was discussed. We're still working through procurement issues, but it looks like coming to fruition on the bubblers, and I know windows are soon being finalized as well, but not any other projects are firmly solidified besides those major ones right now. This is set aside for possibilities. So. About what? About 6 weeks ago, CAULI was discussed by the committee when a stick building or a permanent building was adopted versus the previous direction of modulars. That's still in the works with the city and the OPM.
Is that still on target for fall?
I haven't got an update on that yet, Ms. Doherty, because the city was going to pick up the cost of getting an OPM on that, but I should let you know on the STEM modulars, that's still on course. The OPM has attained architectural services, so we're awaiting that cost estimate and study to bring that back to the committee so the committee can commit to that, given the number of classrooms that can be produced with the 5 to 5.5 million.
So we'd be looking at, I'm going to round up, 6 million basically to resolve our issues at the STEM. With the building at CAULI, what was that? 2 million? Am I being?
About $1.5 million.
$1.5 million, okay. And, okay, so then we'd be looking at those additional dollars to be doing the bubblers and the bottle systems and the windows that are still outstanding, and any other capital investments we choose to make in this time. Okay, thank you very much.
Ms. Chun? Anyone else, or we'll continue with Ms. Turner? Thank you, Ms. Turner.
So the next targeted investment is to support the homeschool partnership. We recommend an additional general fund investment of $110,000. That would include an additional investment in the Parent Leadership Institute that was launched in January of 2023. This was launched to increase family literacy through a centrally coordinated school-based morning, evening, and weekend workshop program and learning events for the parents, guardians, and families. It also is requesting an investment in enrollment and placement services for all families will be upgraded through the Family Resource Center. For an example, there's a, what is it called? I know, but, oh, all right, that's right, it will show here. All right, yeah, the student assignment manager, that's what I was looking for. So one example is enrollment placement service, student assignment manager, and a vaccination clinic that would be held at the Family Resource Center. The next slide is just one that you've seen in the past, just to remind you that there is a fiscal cliff coming. When the ESSER dollars expire this year, then we would have to reevaluate the programs that we've implemented. We've tried to put the ones that we want to sustain on the general fund and try to keep one-time costs like the $10 million investment in facilities. We tried to keep that on the ESSER side. The next slide is just the ESSER three-year plan updated for you. As you know, it continually fluctuates. This current year, we had budgeted spending $28 million in ESSER, but once we did not, due to like staffing shortages and supply chain shortages, it now shows that we're only aiming to spend $21 million and $28 million next year instead. And this is important to point out because in the budget document itself, with the current year ESSER column, I ended up calling that ESSER modified, because if you compare it to the budget that you approved last year, it does differ. So then it makes it confusing, because if originally I thought we were only going to spend $3 million in ESSER, and because we weren't spending enough, I ended up putting $3 million more of social workers from the general fund onto ESSER. So it looks like we spent $6 million in social workers on ESSER this year, and next year only $3 million. So it looks like we're cutting social workers, but we're not. It's just me trying to be as transparent as possible and as accurate as possible with the ESSER funding. But this is the three-year plan. The next slide is just a summary of our strategic investments. It shows you at the top all the funding that we're getting, the Chapter 70, city cash, revolving account, year 3 ESSER, other grants, which gave you a total forecasted revenue of $295 million. And then it shows what is additional dollars for us to spend this year? What is the amount of money that we can spend? And then below that summarizes everything that I just went over, all the strategic investments that it shows how we plan on spending the $45 million. So it's trying to summarize everything you'll see all throughout the budget book. It is what I think we should do is go over, being that we do have 2 public hearings, if we go over half of the pages today, like the first 8 pages, and then any changes that you recommend, I can modify and bring back. So even though you have a book, I realize this, maybe I shouldn't do the books this early next year. Maybe I should bring just the actual document and then bind it after, because if you make changes throughout this process, I can bring you an updated copy at the next meeting, so you're always working with like an ongoing thing. And then May 17th, I can bring a final copy, which would include all of the recommended changes from the school committee, and then you can approve then. Instead of maybe if you want to continue and go line by line tonight and approve, that's fine, but if you want to, we could go line by line, or page by page, I should say, and I can point out the changes that occurred on each page, and then you can ask your questions, and then on May 17th, then we could go quickly if you already know you've already been exposed to it all. So do you want me to just start on page 1 and go into it?
Next slide.
Oh, Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, the final slide is just to say that there's a public budget hearing tonight. May 10th, there's a public budget hearing. May 17th is when the school committee adopts the budget. And June 6th is when the city council adopts their budget.
Ms. Martin?
I did just have a quick question. So as we go into the budget document, I'm back on the ESSER updated page. So the numbers we'll be looking at for ESSER for FY '23, will that reflect, I know they won't be actuals because we're not at the end yet, but will that basically be the actual of what we spent? So like, again, I keep using social workers as an example. Will that already have been reduced based on the real world spending that we did?
So you're talking about this document, right?
Yeah.
Yes, so what I did on this document, I updated the current year, which is FY '23, right?
Yep.
So I updated the ESSER column and I called it ESSER modified.
Okay.
So if you look at the top of the, the title, it says ESSER 2 and 3 modified. And so, yes, so for instance, we actually spent more in social workers this year on ESSER than I anticipated because we did not spend on facilities. Like this year, we had $6 million set aside in facilities. We never spent it. So what I did is I went to facilities and zeroed that out for this current year because otherwise it's not accurate. I don't do that for general fund because the general fund, you don't change it because you want it to match the Chapter 70 numbers, but ESSER fluctuates because it's a 3-year funding source, right? So yes, it will reflect it. So like, again, and I'm glad you brought up social workers because I know that's going to be a question. If social workers, we ended up charging, we know that by the end of the year, we'll have charged $6 million to social workers to ESSER. So when it shows $3 million next year, it looks like we're cutting, but we're not. It's just that we spent $3 million more of ESSER funds rather than general funds to cover the social workers.
Mr. Lay?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Go back to the slide on the Parent Institute. You mentioned about expanding additional investment. Are we hiring more people into that program? Or is that
Yeah, so what you'll see here, and you see on this slide, it won't show the additional investment because much like what Ms. Turner was sharing, if you recall, we didn't hire the director until mid-year. We didn't start up the programming until mid-year. So your budget year to year might not show an increase, but it allows us to expand it for a full year of service. So your allocation, your forecast for next year won't show an increase in the budget year to year, but the actual to the forecast, if you looked at it that way, would show an increase. So this year we started it up. If you recall, we hired the director mid-year, started up the programming mid-year. Next year we'll go to a full year of implementation with the director, hence your expansion.
So there's no new personnel in that program? Right?
It'll be, Ms. Phillips, can you share how we do the teaching of the programming for the Family Leadership Institute?
Sure. So we have one director, and then most of our instructors are community-based or current staff in the schools.
So your question, Mr. Lay, is a little bit loaded. No more full-time, but next year, because there's a full year, there'll be more stipended and contracted staff that won't be full-time employees, but there will be more people that are receiving compensation for teaching the classes, but they'll be current staff or contracted staff from the community.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Chun?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question about the ESSER updated. So when it's stated extended learning pre-K expansion, is that including like a full day or a half day for preschoolers?
Ms. Phillips?
So we are currently at our max for full-day programs using our own buildings. So a lot of our expansion is through community partnerships, where we jointly set our expectations for the criteria in the classroom. So we are hoping to continue to have more full-day classrooms, but right now that is largely through our community partners. We're also looking to have more programs for our 3-year-olds, Right now, we have a very strong four-year-old program, but we want to make sure that children have access, all income levels have access to three-year-old programs as well as four-year-old programs.
Any other questions before we move on to the first page? Okay.
So if you look at section 3, tab 3 in your budget book, I can go page by page until we can either do 8 pages today and 8 pages on the following budget hearing, or if you want me to continue, just let me know when we get there. What I'll do is just explain, so for instance, page 1 is all about school committee expenses. And I don't know how you want me to do it, if you want me to read every line and on every page, or just point out all the changes that occurred. What would you prefer? All right, change is good. Okay, so on page 1, this is the, I agree. So this first page is the school committee page, and it lists school committee expenses. The changes that I need to point out on this page.
So these were the approved motions, so that you'll see on here. So just as a reminder for the community acts as a body. The committee acted here by the form of a motion for each of these requested expenditures.
Right. So the first,
Actually, sorry, I believe we have to take a vote to even start to go into the pages. So I need a motion to vote for the action of necessity, because the school committee will be voting for their own bottom line figure. Motion by Ms. Martin, seconded by Ms. Thompson. Roll call.
Ms. Martin? Yes. Thank you. Ms. Thompson? Yes. Mia Chow? Ms. Chun?
Yes.
Ms. Del Rossi? Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Ms. Delay?
Yes.
5 yeas, 2 absent.
Okay, so now I think we can go to the first page, correct?
okay,
Correct.
so on page 1, this is school committee expenses. The first change is the school committee secretary increased by $1,500, and that's due to an approved motion last year to increase the amount based upon the excessive number of meetings. So we need to include that in the budget so that it's there to fund in case we do need the, to pay that. The other changes are all school committee triggered motions, such as the mayor's suggestion to fund field trips for kids across the district. So we put the amount at $50 per student for 14,500 students. If this amount, if it was intended to just service elementary students or anything like that, we could amend the amount, but I put this in the budget until told otherwise. School committee sponsored international education tours. We put an amount in there of $100,000. School committee sponsored staff appreciation event. We put $25,000. And then we funded a line for delayed bills, MGL 44, Section 64. We need an appropriation each year. So if we put that in here, we actually can say that it is funded. And that's it for page 1. If you, page 2 is the
No,
superintendent.
we have questions, Ms. Turner, thank you.
Questions? So, first off, with the international education tours, what is that?
So this was a motion by the committee to look at expanding the opportunity that's currently provided through the, I believe it's a Fulbright grant, for some of our educators to be able to go over to, in this case, Cambodia, to look at other other additional educators to Cambodia and other countries and regions outside of the continental United States, from which large populations of our young people come. The estimation here that was provided was $5,000 for an additional 20 educators to be able to take part in those activities. The allocation being provided in order to plan out those activities. I believe that motion was approved by the committee last spring, and it was an unfunded line item that was then brought back and requested by the committee again this year.
And then the 200,000 for the, that's for the delayed bills?
Mm-hmm.
Call that whatever you like. Okay. Thank you.
So,
Can we get an explanation on the field trips for 435,000? Like, how do you see that rolling out in the schools? I know that was a motion I think Mayor Chow had.
so what we estimated was 14,500 students at $30 per student as the funding amount. And again, this is why I think it's good if we go over all the changes, but then not vote on the line items until a future date, because it gives us the opportunity to, for you to decide whether you think that's good or not. Like, it's pointing it out to you, it gives you time to think about it. I don't know if the mayor wanted all 14,500 students to have the field trips, or if he said elementary students. I thought he said elementary students, but just to have a number in here and to fund what the motion was, I put 14,500 students times $30 a student.
Ms. Martin?
So would that then, I mean, like, it's not a school committee expense. So we're, like, if we're saying that it would appear here for FY '24, FY '25, say we want to continue it, would it then be embedded in the appropriate place?
Yeah, you would actually move it to another fund code. This is here because that's how the planning took place. So we can't really apply it to curriculum and instruction or apply it to another area. Right now, it's basically a line item funding to support field trips, but field trips are so broad. Ultimately, once we get further parameters, once further guidance is provided by the committee, certainly the finance office can adjust it to what might be a more appropriate or more tailored fund code. This is more so for transparency purposes as you go through planning to understand where the dollars came from, where the concept came from, and these are the school committee motions. The same, Ms. Martin, if you see teacher appreciation might be seen as a similar type activity. That's really a school-based largely activity. Could be that the school committee says, let's allocate that out to schools, or the committee could say, conversely, let's keep that within a central operation for a centralized type of appreciation activity, which would then be a different line item. But you have that flexibility here with where it's placed right now.
So what I want to be sure of is that there are other motions that we had taken over the course of, the last year that aren't showing up here, but I'm assuming that they are embedded in the appropriate places, like teacher positions and things like that. Okay. I just want to make sure, like, if it's not here, it's not anywhere. So that's not the case.
If I
But
could, go ahead, keep going, sorry.
It's your meeting, kid.
No.
Can I? Okay. So my only other point was with the field trip money, it does feel arbitrary. It feels like we picked a number out of thin blue air and just kind of, which we have a tendency to do. But would it be possible in these next couple of weeks to get a more maybe nuanced understanding of what the schools would like to do with this? I'm not saying they have to commit to anything, but just to have a sense, $50 a kid, it just seems like a round number we threw out there. There may be, a little more thoughtful way to kind of decide how schools would like to use those funds. It may not necessitate us changing that number at all, but it is a conversation that I'd like to see happen. Bless you. Thank you.
Are you all set, Ms. Martin? Sorry. I agree with you. I think it'd be great to have some idea how that funding would go, and whether it's each school gets this little pocket of money and they say the 7th graders get to do this field trip, the 5th graders get to do that, that just to have some understanding. And also to your point about unfunded motions that we had, I know for, I want to say 2 years, if not more, this committee and the previous committee approved having a mental health audit done to really look at how we're delivering services. I'd like to know that we have funding to do that and where that funding lies. So I think that would be important to make us aware of.
Sure.
Dr. Boyd, did you want to say something?
No, just to say noted, and I think as we go through it, if we don't see it, we can certainly make sure it shows up here under the SC motions if the committee would prefer, just for transparency purposes.
So just to recap, to make sure that I'm following what you want, I'm going to move field trips to, we do have it was a good point, because we do have a field trip line It's called the UML field trip, and another, later in the budget. So I can do that. I did just put this here because they were big motions, but like you said, there are other motions. But the three things I'm going to take away today from page one is move field trips to another line, another page, ask schools what would they do with the field trip money, and add funding for mental health audit. Okay,
So just to clarify, I know we had talked about an HR audit. I believe we already had assigned a contractor who was going to do it. We just asked to put on hold till the investigation. Is that money already accounted for in this budget that we're working on for next year, or is it out of the FY 22-23 budget?
That's currently accounted for in your FY23 budget. If the committee so chooses to move it to FY24, then we would have to allocate dollars in FY24.
So I would think that that's what we would want to do, again, on this school committee page. It will be dollars that won't be spent in FY23, but that we will be spending in FY24. That's I would anticipate we're not going to do that until June, after June.
Okay. And to follow up on that, we do have a current investigation that is going to cost some funding. I don't know if we've gotten any idea from BHPK. I know we just extended, we asked them to go back 5 years, but to only complaints that come forward up until the end of the day, May 19th.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe to get some sense of a budget on that item, we could, if we can use FY23 money for that.
I think we should be. That would be the
Definitely.
plan. I mean, they did submit a proposal, so we do have a sense in the kind of $15,000 range, but I do think it's something that should be completed and paid for in FY23. It shouldn't roll over into the next year.
Okay, great. Thank
Or
you.
you have the delayed bill line item that you can certainly look towards here.
Anyone else on this page? Okay, Ms. Turner?
Okay, and just again, I'm going to say this just to make sure we're on the same page. At the next meeting, I will bring an updated section 3 for you with an updated cheat sheet so that you have a summary of the changes, so that it constantly updates. It reflects all of our changes that we're talking about as we go. And then on May 17th, if we do the vote, it would be based upon everything that you've changed to date. So say, for instance, we do have a fall reconciliation line, and it's more or less like a suspense line, right? To allow for the things that we did not think of, such as the audit, the mental health audit. That number will change as we make all these changes, and so it will show as an update when we go on. Page 2 is just the superintendent's page. Just as another point, something to note, because we are in negotiations, all the salary lines remain the same, except if the number of FTEs changed, because we don't know what the raises are going to be. But when there were contractual, like say if there are some people that had contracts already, then we did put it in here for transparency, but there's no major change to page 2. Page 3, I can't even see anymore. Page 3, there's one change. It is the request for a budget and fund analyst. It is someone, we did cut a Title I position a few years back, and there's no one that can monitor whether the spending is occurring with the different programs. So it's a suggestion that other districts have. And so that's one request, a budget and fund analyst. Another,
Sorry, did you,
go ahead.
Ms. Thompson, did you have your hand up?
So quick, ooh, wow, that's really hot. So quick question, do we not currently have a grants manager? So just looking at this, and if not, who is handling our grants?
We do have a grants manager, but we have like right now we have $40 million for this year for grants, right? So the grants manager, her position, she's works extensively to just try to keep up, but what she's keeping up with is all the technical stuff, like the grant, drawing down money, reporting, doing all that amendment type stuff. We want someone that's able to look and say strategically, like, you know how I'm always talking about first to expire, first to spend? We need someone that's able to look, because if you're not spending one grant quickly enough, then you end up having to send the money back. Or if you know that you can charge, like what I do with social workers, spend this money down now, because that's going to expire first. We want someone that can actually look at the programmatic pieces of funding, not just, and we don't want to limit the person to just grants. We want it to be someone that looks at even the general fund dollars. If we say in the budget, yes, we're going to fund this investment, but then because everyone's so busy, we go on throughout the year and no one's spending the dollars, we want someone that can actually look at it analytically. We're all like chasing our tails trying to keep up with the actual technical part of the job, that there's no one to watch whether we're doing the program pieces. So we want someone like that. The other change on this page, or not change, but suggestion, is a recruitment and onboarding position that would focus on diversity and onboarding. So that's another request. On page 4, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whipping right along, aren't you? So why is it showing a 0 FTE for that grants position in FY '23?
On page 3?
On page 3, yes.
On the budget and fund analyst?
The grants manager is also a 0.
Oh, that's, oh, no, if you look to the right of that, see where it says 0?
Oh, so it's listed, okay, because
It's
it's
a-
being paid from the grant.
Yes, it's being paid from the
Okay.
grant, so the one FTE on grants manager is under the, it's being split between various grants.
So then, because I was just looking at the totals, we've got 55 in FY '23, 57 in '24. So it's the additional, what are the additional positions then? Because the grants person will still be being paid by the grant.
Oh, you want to see what the additional,
FTE is.
the additional FTE, are the, you know how it went up to 55 to 57?
Yes.
That would be that fund manager position and the recruitment and onboarding position, that HR position, the diversity one.
Okay, okay. Where is that on the list here?
It's actually on the second section under human resources, second line. So if you look at the second highlighted section, do you see it, where it says human
Yep.
resources? Do you see where it's,
1420?
I'm sorry?
I'm just. saying that-
1420, yep.
Yeah,
And
so-
then it says human relations generalist, recruitment and onboarding. And because we didn't get down to the technical title, I put recruitment and onboarding, but we did want to focus on diversity, like a diversity hiring manager, but we didn't define the title yet, so that's why I put recruitment and onboarding.
But it would be part of the HR
Yes.
team as opposed to,
I believe it would be a combination, work with HR, but still work with the equity office as well.
Might be easier if the new positions were highlighted to be able to jump out at you. But basically, you're looking at over $350,000 in new positions under HR, correct? If I'm reading that page?
100,000 in new dollars in
in that
HR?
one position. So that one position would be making more than your assistant HR director.
If, we put a range here just to put it in, but if we could change the amount. And just for the record, yeah, you're right, I did have it highlighted, and unfortunately, when I was out last week, they thought that that was just for my own notes and took it out. But I can, for next Wednesday, go back through and highlight it all so that you can it will point out the changes.
So right now, we have 2 HR generalists. Is that what that means? That we currently have that?
Yes,
And you want to add a recruiting and onboarding person for 100,000?
yes,
That would be under HR.
yes.
It's difficult to make these plans about HR when so much is still up in the, we haven't done the audit yet. We don't have a director, do we? Do we have somebody who's serving as a director of HR that has a diversity background, that has the experience, any of that?
This might be an opportunity to take that position, that $100,000, and put it into the suspense account, so that then it would be there, and then we'll be making those decisions as we go forward.
I'm getting questions from the request. Are we voting tonight or not? We're just.
We're not. We're just
We're not gonna go,
discussing,
we're just
yeah.
gonna go page by page and try to get a better understanding. So do you want to
I would make that as a motion to have that $100,000 and that position moved into the suspense.
To just go into the suspense account for it says HR, recruiting and onboarding, whatever?
If I
So that's-
could, if it just makes it easier for the committee, remember with positions, you have 3 different steps that you have to take. So you have the budgeting steps, then you're going to go through job description and posting. So you have multiple opportunities with that. Certainly, if the committee moves it to suspense, but just for procedural matters, you do have multiple different ways through policy that these come back to you for a new position.
I understand that. I think that in terms of what Ms. Martin is recommending, it does kind of put it in one place. Whatever, any new positions, I think we should be thinking about closely, like even the one we talked about on the previous page, which I don't remember what one it was, no, but it just puts it in one spot as opposed to being spread out through the, so do we have a second on Ms. Martin's motion to take that position and just put it in the suspense account? What that means is we're not actually voting on it. It doesn't go away, but we're just putting it to the side. Ms. Thompson, do you have your hand up? Oh, she's seconding it, okay. Okay, so now we need a roll call.
Ms. Martin? Ms. Thompson? Mia Chow? Ms. Chun?
Yes.
Ms. Del Rossi? Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Ms. Delay?
Yes.
5 yeas, 2 absent.
Anything else on page 3?
No.
Any new positions on page 3 that you want to bring to our attention, Ms. Turner, that I might be missing?
Already, the one that I already mentioned, which is the budget and fund,
The grants manager one?
well, not grants manager, it's right under the grants manager, it's called budget and fund analyst.
So those are 2 new positions that would come out of, that would be under the finance office?
No, one new position for under finance, one under HR. The grants manager already exists. And budget and fund analyst is a title just to make sure that it's not just grant-oriented. We want it's the same person, it's one position. Budget/fund analyst.
And is that, I'm sorry, is that the one that you're referencing in terms of the Title I? That position, this new position would be
It would be to.
managing that?
It would, yes. We don't want it to we don't want to limit it to just grants. We want to be able to, I don't want someone to come in and then just have a little segment if we can get them to do a lot of the things that are falling through the cracks, right?
I'm just asking because we have had Title I positions in the past.
Right.
Is this replacing that, or do they exist someplace else?
No, it would more or less replace what we
Okay.
cut a few years ago.
So it would be the same job description?
No, we would modify it to make sure that it's not limited just to Title I. We want the position to cover all the little areas that are falling through the cracks right now. So it would be, it would be modified.
So is that something that we would want to see, that job description,
Yeah.
sooner rather than later? If we're going to vote on, okay. All right.
Okay.
Any other questions? We'll move to page 4. Thank you.
Okay, so on page 4, there's 2 things. One was a part-time early learning coordinator or feasibility study amount that was in the budget for a few years that we did not end up doing, so we reduced that. And then the increase on this page is a significant increase, but it's one that we found necessary. The photocopier maintenance service has been cut significantly over the last several years due to budget shortages. And then when I came in, we increased it slightly, but we never increased it back to what it was before. So we did have to switch to better quality machines and increase the number of machines, which is causing us to have to invest $487,000 more. But it was a study done by the technology office. They worked with the schools to make sure that everyone had sufficient machines and, like I said, the quality. The machines that we did put in place based upon the previous bid, they were the lowest bidders, and they called it high-quality machines, but what they didn't tell you is you could only put 1 ream of paper in at a time, so the teacher is forced to sit there and keep filling the tray, where the new machines, they can fill it with like 5 reams of paper and walk away and come back, so.
So have we made those purchases already? So then is the 487 just a maintenance for next year?
We've already made the purchases, but no, they would actually, if you approve this, then we would continue. Right now, it was a temporary thing to get there was a grievance against us. And so it was a temporary thing until we could go through the full study. If you approve this, then we would commit to the machines. They know it's pending like this. It was a short-term thing until we got the approval from you.
So but it was with a different company than we had initially.
Right, and we were working with Axiom, and now we're with Canon, which I'm trying to go with Canon.
So for the 487, is that a purchase or is that a one-year lease rate across the district?
We would do all leases from now on, but that's your annual lease, but it would be a significant increase to the number and to the size and quality of the machines.
So basically, we're looking at $500,000 a year. I'm trying to figure out if
Yes.
any of this is purchase that we're doing in a year when we have a lot of money, which would be great, and then it goes down over time. But you're telling me it doesn't. It'll be $500,000 next year and every year.
Right. When Jay Lang was here, what he did is he would make, and we're trying to follow the lead of the city too. They do all leases now too.
Yeah.
Because by the time you own the machine, that's when they're breaking down.
Right.
Right. So, but when Jay was here, he would do he would purchase some machines because it would have like a 3-year warranty, and then he would do the other, another thing with, not leases, but maintenance, right? So now if we do lease, it's combining the two, and we get the service, the free toner, the staples, all that stuff.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Lay.
Just an afterthought. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Mann, question for you. Do you agree that since we want to put some position in the suspension account, how about the superintendent? Should we put that in the suspension account too, or what?
I think if you'd like to make that argument, now's the time to do it. Go ahead.
So.
That would be my
That may be-
successor, not me, so by all means, please feel free.
I mean, I'm asking just because does it make sense to put that? I'm not fully going full speed on doing it, but I'm just asking, would that make sense to do that?
I think here I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I think one thing that the committee might, especially in line with the rest of the conversation, the committee might want to consider is the range of my prior contract the right range that you want to appropriate for next year? That's what's utilized here. Would the committee want to allocate also a placeholder for a potential full search for a permanent superintendent? We could go back to the historic line item from the time when you conducted the search that hired me. Those would be the line items. I don't know, Committee Member Lay, whether it would benefit you to move it to a different fund code, because you're ultimately going to be committing to a superintendent unless the committee's thinking about some type of alternative arrangement that has not been utilized here in the city of Lowell. Otherwise, you'd be looking at a range, and if you think currently the placeholder you have is aligned with my current contract as a range, you could certainly go differently. And as well, I think it probably would benefit the committee to put a placeholder going into FY24 for the potential of a search based on the line item that was utilized in 2019. I don't know if you recall, Mr. Lay, what that line item was, but we can add that if that benefits the committee.
Mr. Lay?
No.
I leave it there. We leave it there.
And we could say if we should be getting invoice or a bill from MASC fairly quickly, we'll then know what the amount is probably in time to move it before the May 19th number, so.
But I think it does make sense to put some funds in for the search we're going to be doing for a permanent,
Okay.
right? That's what you mean, the number, they'll give us what they think that will be, okay?
I did it.
Ms. Turner, if I could ask, when you speak, to have the mic in front of you, because you turn your head to the right and the mic is on the left.
Okay.
Okay.
There you go.
All right, so we ready to move forward on page 5, or were there any other questions on page 4? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Turner.
On page 5, there are no changes to the numbers, but I do want to point out that we did put assistant EC coordinator when that's actually the early childhood coordinator. So I will be changing that in the titles. On so no changes to positions or numbers on that page. So on page 6, we have changes, just adjustments to principals and assistant principals. The amounts, just when contracts change and people change, we did change some of those. We also reduced one school clerk last year. We had approved a clerk for the Parent Leadership Institute. That was not requested this year, and we never filled it, so we did reduce by one school clerk. One student service specialist, Lowell High did request an additional student service specialist for the freshman academy. So those are the changes on page 6. Should I move on to page 7 or
Any other questions about page 6? So are those adjusted principal stipends, have those contracts all been up to date now? Dr. Boyd, are we still negotiating with our principals?
Dr. Hall?
Yes, I believe we have a finalized grid of where we want to settle with the principals. Not all of them have agreed to the offers, but those will be solidified by next week.
Thank you. So I think we can move on to page 7, I'm sorry, 7.
On page 7, we did have approximately 78 additional teachers added. So there is a $3.8 million increase on your cheat sheet that says additional teachers that include PBR teachers and instructional specialists. We also have a change suggested in there. It's listed as early childhood expansion. And again, next Wednesday when I bring this again, I will do exactly what Madam Chair Doherty said, which is to highlight the changes so they jump out at you. But early childhood expansion is a position that we want to right, currently the early childhood coordinator is the principal of the Cardinal, and she's serving as an early childhood coordinator. So we want to separate those two positions to make it more reasonable. The other line item is called budget exceptions, which was, it's decreased from last year, but we still needed it. When we're going through the fair student funding process, we often find situations with an alternative school where, let's say they didn't get enough funding. We treat them differently because otherwise their numbers would be too low. So when we find that they have a need, we add it to this budget exception line. For instance, the L numbers were skewed, and we had to add more money to the schools for L positions, so that's listed under that line. The Latinx position is a suggested add, and then there's a recruitment and retention line, which is a placeholder for step increases, contractual increases for salaries, and negotiations. So those are the changes on page 7.
So with the recruitment and retention, how does that relate to the other position?
The recruitment and retention is not actually a position. What it is, you know how I told you that we didn't put any increases to salary lines because we're negotiating right now? So it's all the step increases are in there. An amount, there's a placeholder for negotiations and any other contractual changes that we'll see through the collective bargaining process. It's a placeholder.
So this 11.5?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
I noticed that we don't have any funding for the TV studio, and I know I just had a motion asking for a report on that. We eliminated those positions during very tight budget years. I do think, however, there was a value in having the TV studio, so I don't know if we can get that information sooner so that we can have some options based on the motion I made last night about the TV studio. And we also had a room set up that we could have our subcommittee meetings broadcast, so we weren't at the having to get on a very busy schedule for the chamber or the mayor's reception room for our subcommittee meetings. And I know we invested in that technology. I'd like to know, that was the motion last night, but I'm just thinking that before we finalize, we should get a sense if those are areas of priority for the committee to have some funding for that. I don't know what my colleagues think about that, but
So-
definitely for the subcommittee meetings, it would be a huge advantage for us. We used to be able to schedule them when we wanted, back to back. We weren't worried about, whether the chambers were available. I think it would be quite an asset for the work of this committee. Dr. Boyd?
Yes, so the adjustments to the TV studio are due to the construction at Lowell High School, and there's a program partnership with the LTC to partner during the course of construction. I don't know if that's the adjustment. That's the only substantive adjustment to programming. It's a space adjustment based on the studio and the construction, which we now partner with LTC. If there's another type of adjustment that you're looking for, certainly program staff will provide a full update on the studio for you by form of motion. But I don't know if I'm assuming incorrectly, but I'm guessing that perhaps the substantive adjustment that you're questioning, that's due to the construction, is now done in partnership with LTC.
Ms. Martin?
Yeah, I would just say I think it's two separate things, and I think the discussion around the television studio, and more importantly, the television programming
Right.
that we used to provide at the high school, that's where we want to make a significant investment. I would agree, and that I think your motion from the other night, we should be getting that information soon. I think the second part you're talking about is to make functional the kind of small-scale studio that exists currently at the central office. And I think that could be something that if we could get an estimate, that would make sense to go onto the school committee page, that first page, as an investment we want to see made in the next year. And I honestly can't imagine it would be much.
Right.
But I mean, even if we needed to plug into that line item, some a stipend for a staff person to be able to do that. I believe the technology is still there.
Right.
So, but if we could get that information again sooner rather than later, we could incorporate it into the budget as a specific line item.
I would support that.
Okay, so on this page, I put research the central office televised subcommittee stipend and possibly add back some TV studio positions. I just want to make sure it's clear, though, we do have the video production teacher and a digital media producer. They're just in the grant column because they're funded by the PEG grant.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. Ms. Thompson?
I was just wondering if you could give me a little bit of a breakdown of what the Latinx Scholars is. Maybe I just overlooked that, but if you could give me some information, that'd be great.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. This is in partnership with Fortaletas through our Hispanic Student Success Task Force. So it's currently within program design under Ms. Phillips' leadership through our Office of Educational Equity and Community Empowerment. So those details will be forthcoming. There's a couple of program design principles that are still being deliberated in terms of cohort of students and program focus, but it has been within down to the point of kind of a couple of decision points where we feel confident that this would be the line item allocation, but it's going to be done in conjunction with community partnership. I'm excited to hear about what that work will look like. I think, and I believe several committee members were at our last community event a couple of weeks ago where this was kind of one of the founding principles. The couple of decision points here, which are the options that are being considered. This could be a focus on a cohort of students who are underperforming to bring them up to grade level performance through some targeted support, particularly amongst our Latinx population, specifically amongst our Latinx population. Or it could be a cohort of young people that are currently performing at proficient. We're moving towards advanced coursework to accelerate opportunities in advanced coursework. And that's the last decision point that's currently being deliberated with our community partners. And that'll be a cohort of students that we anticipate might be approximately 20 to 25 each year that are then being supported over time. So that way within a high school, you would have 100 students over the course of a 4-year high school strand that are being supported into one of these two. And one of the areas and what we anticipate is whatever the first starting cohort is, the other portion of this would then be added as a second and expansion cohort. But the current thinking is start with one of the cohorts and then go from there towards expansion. So I'm pretty excited about the direction that this could take, and I would expect that after this fiscal year, you'll probably be looking at 2 different cohorts, looking at both of those particular profiles of students, focusing within in our Hispanic Latinx population. again, in partnership with a pretty exciting organization that's really taking firm hold in the community in Fort de Leysa and our Hispanic Student Success Task Force partnership.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to say yes, and I think that we need both sides of that spectrum, and I think obviously we all have been kind of horrified by the numbers for our Latinx population. So I think, that there's targeted, work along with the task force specifically, and then with the partnership with Fortaleza to, one, empower those students that were doing well and need to be followed and supported throughout the process, but also for our students who are struggling and need those additional supports as well. So thank you. I just wanted more clarity.
Ms.
So
DeLay?
is that 80,000 a teacher?
The plan is for, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize you didn't.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
It's all very exciting. Go ahead. So can he answer?
Dr. Boyd, please answer.
We anticipate that it will be program support staff, but whether it's a teacher, whether it's additional project management, this is a placeholder to make sure you have the appropriation and to kind of go through this type of planning discussion. But the committee should fully expect under Ms. Phillips' leadership that you'll hear back from the community as you start to allocate these funds out. But it certainly could be a teacher, could be a project manager, could be a fellowship type opportunity as we have with other programming. And Fortaleza has committed to being a part of this. They have certain funding available to themselves, and this is the district's contribution to that. Again, you may see some adjustments here as we get further down planning. This is a placeholder within your budget.
Thank you.
Ms. DeLay?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It sounds pretty good, Dr. Boyd, about this plan. But my question is, wouldn't you want to extend it to, say, middle schools instead of waiting for the high school? Because somehow I feel that we need to catch them a little bit early.
Dr. Boyd?
Thank you. Yes, that's also part of the programming planning, actually. So you identify an important aspect of it. That's part of the design question. Is it 8th grade or is it a 9th grade cohort? They're really going into, we're anticipating implementation for next school year, and we're into the planning portion of the planning where it's kind of those last final decisions that have to be made before you can come to a full appropriation and detailed appropriation. So hence the reason that it's a line item. But I think you're absolutely right, Mr. DeLay. That's going to be a decision point too. That's a critical transition period that we know. And do you look at 8th grade? Do you look at summer between? Or do you look at the entering 9th graders? And that's a decision point with our community partners that's still being considered. It has to be a decision made. Ultimately, and as Ms. Thompson said, both and, ultimately, we're expecting that this would be expanded across, but you got to start somewhere.
Are you all set, Ms. DeLay? If I could just add, I don't know if this seems completely crazy, but we're talking about, I'm going back to the Student Resource Center, 1.25 million. We don't really have a full plan. It's being fleshed out. And now 80,000, I think the whole idea is definitely something we need, but I'm wondering, there has to be some planning involved in coming up with those numbers, and would it be, does it make sense to get something, even a one-page write-up of how did you get to 1.25 million for the Student Resource Center, and how did you get to 80,000 for a Latinx program, and what are the aspects? I mean, it seems like we're just picking amounts without really understanding how that money is going to be used and how it's going to benefit our students without having a full-fledged plan. But I don't know what my colleagues think on that, but
Yeah,
I'd be more comfortable if I had something in writing, even just a one page that says, okay, so we want 1.25 million for the Student Resource Center. How is it going to fit in with the other alternative programs we have to try to capture our students before they become dropouts, and how we're going to use that money, right? And the same with the 80,000 for the Latinx program. Ms. Thompson?
I agree with that, but I also, and I've been saying to Ms. Martin, she's been having to listen to me as I've said it repeatedly. I think that the Latinx, the initiative needs more money than that. $80,000, I get it, that you're trying to be conservative. But for me, really, what is the wish list of things that would be successful for us to then make a formative decision about, how to move this forward? Because the need is so dire. It's not something that we can just kind of rest on. So for me, it's really, what is the reasonable wish list to get stuff moving in the appropriate manner? Thank you.
Ms. Martin, did you have your hand up?
I would just say, I mean, it does seem like if we even wanted to kind of follow suit in putting that 80,000 into the suspense account, we'd then have the opportunity to add into it at that point when we have everything in there at once. And at that point, I mean, and I don't want us to create a program in the next week. You know what I mean? But, I think to Ms. Doherty's point, and to Ms. Thompson's point, we want to make sure we have the resources so that as that program, that plan gets developed, there are already resources set aside for it based on the commitment of the committee to want to invest in that effort, very particularly in the next school year.
And just to that point, if I could add, I'm very aware of that fiscal cliff, that we have one more year of this ESSER money, and we have to be very careful about how we're spending that. So I want to see some plan. And again, I go back to the 1.25 million because I'm still not clear on how that's going to work. Are we going back 3 years to dropouts? I mean, we have hundreds of kids at risk of dropping out right now. Our dropout rate, or let's say our graduation rate, is lower than it's ever been. That is an immediate, imminent need. So that's just where I'm coming from with that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Alternatively, I feel that if that is the program that we are going to do, I think we should just leave it there. So we have the base amount to start with. If we want to increase, if we feel that we need to increase later, then we can add more fund to the program. So if we take it out, I feel that it seems like we're not going to be serious about it. So for me, I feel that we should leave it there and work on it.
Well, what if we just get some more information for next week and just...
Then we can make a choice.
Okay.
That makes sense.
And Dr. Boyd, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just want to make sure we can clarify. So the graduation rate is essentially flat from prior pandemic to now. So that's where our graduation rate is. The two numbers that you're referencing, one is based on a forecasting of staff needs. That's the Latinx program. The other is forecasting on a per student need based on the number of students that we are forecasting to be able to recapture that are currently not appropriated dollars because they're not within program. If we are able to recapture them, which is our goal, then they are going to require program support. Those programs will be one of two things. Either it's going to be additional seats and additional funding to current program. They'll have to be allocated to additional students, or it's going to be new program design options because we determine there's a trend amongst the students that we recapture that would then require us to design new program. So the caution I'd present the committee, and again, it's a word of caution just because this is going to be going into next fiscal year, you need some level of appropriation in order for us to be able to commit to doing the work at a staff level. So this is an appropriation line. Every single one of them will require multiple decision points for the committee. A position can't be created without a job description and a posting. Additional program for current schools would require a budget transfer across. I would anticipate Ms. Desmond would be bringing back to you multiple reports with the continuous work that's underway. However, her staff would have to have some type of appropriation to know the guardrails and parameters by which they're planning and programming. So that's the purpose of this here, would be an appropriation so that you provide staff with the programming parameters and guardrails. One is based on a per student allocation or guardrail. The other is based on a staffing anticipation. And the staffing anticipation, again, was done in conjunction with our partnership. It's just a matter of whether you're using a current staff with stipend or you're using a new position. Both would come back to you as a posting, if that's at all helpful.
Thank you. Anything else on this page? Okay, page 8.
So this is the halfway point. If you want me to continue after this, I will, but this page does show significant changes. After studying, we had a significant increase in our special ed population over the last few years. but we made the investment this year based upon studying the numbers. We want to ask for an additional occupational therapist, 3 speech pathologists, 4 BCBAs. We want to increase the building-based supplement. Substitutes long-term, it's decreased by $500,000. We had increased it the previous year, but based upon the actuals of this year, our long-term sub account is not being spent in the manner that we thought it would, whereas the day-to-day sub account is significant. We're definitely spending more in that area. We did get the request of 62 additional paraprofessionals from the schools through the Fair Student Funding process, a library media specialist position. Under library services, here's where it can get confusing. If you look at that line, it looks like we're going down $3 million. That's only because when we did this investment last year, we called it the library revitalization, but whereas this year, we know right above that on that page, you'll see that we increased by $1.5 million, the library media specialist line, right? So in other words, instead of it being under just a blank library services, I moved it to library media specialist. So I can see, if you look on the section on page 8, it's about the first, second, third, fourth section down. You'll see library media specialist increased. You'll see the increase of 14 specialists under the ESSER column, but then you see a decrease of library services on the third line, if that makes sense. And just so you know, the reason why it goes down $3 million is we had $3 million, $1.5 million was to cover 14 library media specialists at the school, and then $1.5 million was going to be for the library books. Because we had extra funding in the general fund this year, we pre-purchased it so that we did not leave money on the table, and that freed up that money for ESSER next year for the facilities investment. So that's why you'll see things there. And again, this is the page that has the alternative ed program expansion of $1.2 million that you saw in the summary that I presented earlier. Extended learning time, there's an additional investment of $700,000, which is the 1.5 additional days. And then finally, there's an additional investment in tutors. I think there were approximately 22 additional tutors requested from the schools. So that was also done through the Fair Student Funding process. When I bring the update next week, I will highlight it also. It jumps out because I know there's a lot on this page.
Ms. Martin?
I would like to ask if we could return to the library thing, because you lost me halfway through.
Okay.
So as I'm looking at it, you've got the library media specialist. Last year we had 1. This year it looks like 3 FTEs, but at that same amount, and then an additional 14 in the grant funding.
I'm sorry, because that's a mistake.
Okay.
So that's a mistake. It's the 3 should really be over with the 14 under ESSER.
Okay.
And the amount should be moved over. So I'll fix that and move the amount over to the ESSER column because that's being funded through the ESSER funds.
So we'd be basically looking at the 1 library media specialist from this year would stay on the local funds, and we'd be looking at 16.
Yes.
Okay. Now, are we anticipating that those positions are going to go away in FY25?
We would hope not. We would just use Student Opportunity Act money at that time.
Okay, but for right now, we're going to put them on SR. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Ms. Thompson?
And maybe this is just for my clarity. Under the paraprofessionals section, the second one down says paraprofessionals, special ed 1-to-1. And it looks like we had 45, now it's down to 25?
Good question. So, yes, so that's another thing, like we funded 45, the 1-to-1 paras is based upon the IEPs. So the previous year when we did a count, there were 45. And then after students move on to other districts or graduate, then we need less. So the director of special ed gave me the current count of, I think there were 21 students in the district that need it now. Now, the good news is some people could say, well, then I put 25 in here to make sure that if we go up by 4 students. But to put too much in that account is going to give us vacancy savings when we do have a circuit breaker account and a sped stabilization account that we have with the city now. So if we do end up going back up to 45 students that need a one-to-one parents, we could always go to those accounts if needed. Do I continue to the next page, or do we call it a night and finish the other 8 pages? No, I don't know, because this is halfway, this is the halfway point, so.
I do know that some members, this is their 4th night out this week, so I'm okay if you want to pause here. How do you feel, Dr. Boyd, about that?
Yes, and I also think you provided great guidance that what we can do is we can take the guidance that you provided for the first half and apply it throughout the document. There's ultimately here what we're deciding, it sounds like, is what's the most comfortable fund code to use. There hasn't really been, I haven't heard a question or resistance to any of the particular investments. It's just what's the most appropriate fund code so that the committee can operate with a level of comfort and transparency going into the next fiscal year. Does that sound pretty clear? And
I would say on my part, I'd like more information on some of these placeholder funds. So we actually have a sense of how you got to those numbers and what we're buying for the
Sure.
money.
That certainly that works as well. And Ms. Turner, does that sound like clarity of guidance? All right. With that, committee, I think we're clear on next steps ahead of the next budget hearing.
So I think we would take this as a, we're not really adjourning, or are we?
You're going to recess.
We're going to recess the budget hearing until next Wednesday. A motion to recess by Ms. Thompson, seconded by Mr. Lay. All those in favor? Thank you very much.